In this video, I'm going to go over the 4 major types of warm season grasses. The 4 that at least I'm most familiar with in my area. That's Bermuda, Zoysia, Centipede, and St. Augustine. I'm going to show you what all 4 of them look like. I'm going to talk to you about the pros and cons of each grass type. Today's video is sponsored by Graham Spray Equipment. You can see my Graham spray rig on the back of my truck in the background. It's a 400-gallon spray rig that I've been using for years. If you need a spray rig for your business, go to grahamsc.com or give those guys a call. Now, let me say this as I get ready to talk to you about the warm season grasses, because I get a lot of people that I'm in some Facebook groups stuff where people talk about cool season grasses. And I recently came back from a part of the country that has cool season grasses, and I'll say this about the difference. Yes, I saw some really nice cool season lawns, but as a percentage, I saw a lot of cool season lawns that looked terrible. It was like as I went through a neighborhood, maybe 10 to 15% of the yards looked good. There was a few others that looked okay, and there was probably half of them that looked just awful. Where when I go through our warm season neighborhoods where I live, I'm going to say 80% of them look pretty good. So yeah, I think a peak cool season lawn may be able to take the cake over a warm season lawn. But in general, I see people that, I don't know if people just care about the lawns more. I don't know what the situation is. But at least where I live, it seems like far more of them are looking pretty decent. So let's get started. Bermuda, Zoysia, Centipede, and St. Augustine, perhaps even in that order, we'll see. Now, I'm filming this video in late May, and so the best color for warm season lawns is probably yet to get here. And this grass was mowed yesterday, so took a little bit of the color out of it, mowing it probably slightly shorter than I should have. But you can see it's looking decent, especially for late May. And with the best days of growing it not here yet. And what I want you to know about Bermuda grass, let's just go over pros and cons. The pros of a Bermuda grass lawn, and this is going to be a pros of all the warm season lawns, I guess, in comparison with the cool season lawns, is that it does spread fast. Now, Bermuda faster than the others that I'm going to talk about. Matter of fact, I live on about 4 acres here. I probably have 3 acres of Bermuda grass that I spread with just a handful of pallets of Bermuda sod. Some of it we sprigged, some of it I just literally took the square and threw it out there and just watched what happened. Now, it took some time, but if I would have sodded this, it would have cost a fortune. If I would have seeded it, it would have cost a small fortune. So that was a way where I could put it out there and watch it spread. That's an advantage we have over our cool season lawns. Now, the cool season lawns, the great thing about them, you get a bad cool season lawn, you can just kill the whole yard, overseed it, reseed it in the fall, and you got a brand new lawn. And that's a little bit more challenging to do with our warm season grasses. Bermuda grass, what do you need to know? Well, one of the things I like about it from a weed control and fertilization perspective is you can spray most anything on it. I mean, within reason, but it is very hardy, okay? Very difficult to kill the grass. So you can be a little bit more aggressive on your weed control applications on a Bermuda grass lawn. The negative of that is if on a Bermuda grass lawn, if you decide not to do anything, not to spray it at all, it will absolutely get covered in weeds. It's not a grass that you can just plant and just let it go and say, oh, look at my beautiful Bermuda grass lawn. It doesn't work that way. Absolutely covered, particularly in crabgrass. I don't know exactly what that is. It maybe is a little bit thinner. It thins out in the wintertime and got a lot of space in there compared to a Zoysia, which is going to grow a little bit thicker. But anyway, you got to spray it or it's going to usually look terrible. Another thing, as far as the pros go for Bermuda grass, extremely drought tolerant. We had a pretty serious drought, I'm going to say 6 years ago that I remember, and it was in August and September, 2 very hot months in Alabama where I live. And I think it went about 2 months without any real significant rain. And I tell you, every yard looked basically brown. But what I noticed was the following spring, which ones came back? Well, most of them came back, but the ones I saw more damage from was the Centipede and the Zoysia lawns. The Bermuda grass, even though it went through an extreme drought and will turn brown and will basically look dead, it is extremely drought tolerant. So hardy against weed control products, drought tolerant. You can take this as a pro or con, but people ask me a lot of times about the mowing height of Bermuda. I say, what I do to mine, I'll mow it as low as I can get in the spring, 1.5 inches. That's as low as my mower goes. And I try to keep it 1.5 inches. Sometimes I have to use growth regulator and things like that. But over the summer, I usually have to start gradually raising the mowing height. So you say, how high do you mow it? Well, I mean, you think about it, people use Bermuda grass for a putting green on a golf course, and they also bale it for hay. So, I mean, anywhere between a quarter of an inch and 4 foot tall, I guess you could say. For me, I prefer to keep it low, but that's not always easy to do. When the summertime comes, when it's growing, you fertilize, you have to mow it a lot. So it's very versatile as far as that goes. Again, extremely hardy, extremely drought tolerant. And you can really pump the nitrogen to it with your fertilizer and make it look really dark green and have a beautiful Bermuda grass lawn. So, and it's also one of the cheaper ones out there, I think, because the sod farms can grow it so fast because it spreads so fast. So it sells a lot cheaper, at least in my area. It's cheaper than Zoysia, Centipede, or St. Augustine. Let's move on to Zoysia. Let me show you what my Zoysia is looking like this time of year. The other thing I forgot to mention about Bermuda grass is the shade tolerance, which is basically non-existent. I see people all the time, they plant Bermuda grass, they have an area that's thin under a tree, had Bermuda grass, so they go put more Bermuda grass there, and then it looks good for about a week, and then it gets thin, they put more Bermuda grass there. It's like, listen, you got the wrong kind of grass. It needs full sun. It also does not do great at holding a hill, like for erosion purposes, especially if it's partially shaded on that hill. So just don't try that. Full sun for Bermuda or nothing. Don't waste your money. All right, Zoysia. So you can see here bare spots again where the Bermuda's not doing that great, tree roots and things. And so under these crepe myrtle trees, and I'm still not sure this is the best idea, but put some Zoysia. Now it looks good early in the year. Sometimes I think as the trees get leaves on them, it ends up getting more shaded out. This is a Zorro Zoysia, which is very similar to a Emerald Zoysia, and it's one of the fine leaf bladed Zoysias. So you see what it looks like there, real fine leaf. And the Zoysia, I usually cut it a little bit higher. I've been cutting this, I think, about 3 inches. This is dog hair, where we cut some hair off of a dog. So don't pay any attention to that. That's not normal. Let's show you the non-dog hair part. But you can see it grows thicker. One of the things I like about Zoysia, obviously the shade tolerance Bermuda would do awful right here. And I'm not saying that the Zoysia loves being on these trees. It would do better out here with a little bit more sunlight. But you can see it does fairly well. And as you get over here on the other side of the tree where it's catching more sun, you can see a difference in the color. And you can see here Zoysia and Bermuda. And that's one of the good things about Emerald Zoysia or Zorro Zoysia, is it kind of blends in with the Bermuda. I mean, I can tell the difference, but they don't look too bad in this situation. So a lot of times I see people, when they have a tree that's starting to shade out the Bermuda, they'll come in and they'll either put pine straw or mulch, or they could put some Zoysia. It doesn't want to grow in full shade, doesn't necessarily love partial shade, but as long as you're getting 4 to 6 hours of sun, I think you've got a chance for it to grow. More sun would be better, but just to give you an example, you can see the trees we're dealing with, and this Zoysia is doing okay. The wider blade Zoysia is the one I'm more familiar with, is like a Z52 Zoysia or a Meyer Zoysia. They have a wider blade. They're not quite as shade tolerant as the Emerald Zoysia or the more narrow bladed ones. So if you've got shade, and also like on the hillside situation, then a Zoysia is going to be one of your best options for your warm season grasses. Some of the positives about Zoysia, it grows really thick and tight, which is good for weed control. You'll see a yard, I'm thinking one yard in particular that's right down the road from me, has Bermuda and Zoysia in the same yard and had been neglected. And the Zoysia part had very few weeds in it. Bermuda part's covered in weeds. Again, we've already talked about much more shade tolerant. It just looks beautiful, at least in our area. I know some areas, as you go further north, the complaint about Zoysia is that it doesn't green up as fast. You know, if you live in the Midwest or up in the Northeast, it doesn't green up as fast. So it's very slow to turn green, and then it goes dormant quicker, so they get very little green out of it. That's not true for us here in Alabama. I feel like we get a lot of color out of it. It can look great. Maybe a negative, I guess you'd say, is it is not near as fast to spread as Bermuda. It's also not as drought tolerant. I'm not saying it's not drought tolerant, but it's not as drought tolerant. And it can be slow to root when you lay it down as sod. So I encourage people, when they put their Zoysia out in March or April, which a lot of times people will sod it, I said, you're gonna probably have to keep that watered all through this first summer to get it to survive. Now, this first year, it's going to be much better able to handle a drought, but not nearly to the extent that a Bermuda grass lawn would. I've already shared the story about the drought we had several years ago. Some of the Zoysia lawns took damage, and they also are slower to recover when they get damaged. So in summary, the Zoysia yards are my favorite in this area. I think that they're beautiful. They choke out the weeds. Don't need quite as much fertilizer to get good color as you would on a Bermuda yard. There's a lot of advantages, but don't plant a Zoysia lawn if you're not willing to water it. And they can, again, you might think of things like grub damage that you might have on a Zoysia lawn. Bermuda yard may have grubs as well, but it can handle the grubs a little bit better because, I'm not saying the Bermuda yard won't get grub damage, but it's going to recover much faster. Where, let's say a Zoysia lawn, you get grubs, they're eating the roots. You go into the winter with a weak root system, you get winter damage, and you come out, and then it's very slow to recover because it's Zoysia. It just doesn't recover very fast. So just got to understand there are some things about it that aren't perfect, but I love Zoysia, and I think it's a beautiful grass for our area. I only have a little bit of centipede grass out at my house, and it's out by the road. So I'm going to try not to get hit by a car while I talk about the centipede, and I'm going to just show it to you and then come back to safety to actually talk about it. All right, here we go. This is Centipede. It just showed up. Here comes the UPS truck. So this is what your centipede looks like. Let me get back to safety. All right, I survived that, so that was good. Centipede, you may hear it called the lazy man's grass, and I think where that comes from, just my experience, the centipede, if you want just a decent looking yard that you don't have to mow that often, and it'll look halfway decent without spraying it or fertilizing it, then I guess that you'd go with Centipede. I mean, it will do that. From a lawn care perspective, me and a lot of my friends, we get frustrated with Centipede. And the reason is it's a little bit more sensitive. We talked about Bermuda. You could spray a lot of stuff on Bermuda. Centipede's not so much. On a centipede yard, when it's going through like spring transition, you know, it's dormant in the winter and it's starting to come out of dormancy and starting to turn green, you got to be very, very careful what you spray on it. We use a product called atrazine, which will help with some of the broadleaf weeds, but that's a restricted use product, so not everybody can buy that. But if you spray some of the products that I like to use, you may have heard me talk about spraying Change Up. There's a product I use a lot. Change Up's a very good product on centipede grass, except during that spring transition time. If you spray it then, you could really delay the green up. Same thing with metsulfuron, just a very low rate, a 1/4 ounce per acre on centipede during spring transition can turn the yard yellow for weeks. So I'm gonna recommend you not do that. Centipede is more shade tolerant than Bermuda, not as shade tolerant as Zoysia. I would not recommend it for shade. I think centipede can look decent without spraying or fertilizing it, especially if you keep it mowed regular and keep it mowed nice, low and tight. So, you know, anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches. And if you mow it weekly, a lot of times it's going to get those spring weeds, and it's frustrating from our perspective because we can't spray the weeds without turning the grass yellow. And so if the homeowner or you can get out there and just mow the grass and mow it in the spring, then oftentimes those that are well maintained, they get thick enough that they don't seem to get the weed pressure. And if you get some spring weeds, you mow them and they don't come back. So that's what I recommend. But again, from a weed control and fertilization perspective, it can be frustrating. They often in our area will be the first one to turn green coming out of winter. And then you think, well, that's great. Well, it's actually not as great because sometimes you get a late cold snap comes through and then it turns green and now it's not green anymore. And you get that winter, I guess you'd call it spring damage, whatever. But you can also have winter damage. They can look bad coming out of the winter if you had a harsh winter. I know that would be less impactful for those of you that live on the coast and maybe it doesn't get as cold. But we've got single digits temperatures the last 2 years, so the centipede yards have suffered a little bit, and it can be very frustrating. From a weed control and fertilization perspective, again, Change Up's a great product to use. A lot of times I'll put a fall pre-emergent on a centipede lawn, and I've gotten away from the advice of my friend James, who's on the channel sometimes, just kind of gotten away from using a pre-emergent early in the year on my centipede lawns. And one of the reasons is they just don't get nearly as much crabgrass as like a Bermuda yard, for instance. So yeah, you may end up with a little bit of weeds in the lawn. And I try to talk to people, you know, we're trying to help that yard recover from the winter time. So by not spraying the pre-emerge, it's going to help it recover. And then once it turns fully green in April or May, I can come in there with a low rate of change-up, 16 ounces of change-up, and wipe out just about any broadleaf weed in the yard. And they usually look pretty good throughout the summer. So centipede can be frustrating. Keep it mowed nice and tight, mow it regular, and you probably have a decent looking yard. Not as shade tolerant again as your zoysia yards, but not terrible either. So you see centipede a lot of times more on the coast. And as you get down toward Florida, at least in my area, you're gonna see, and there's parts of Texas I know as well, where you're gonna see a lot of St. Augustine grass. I got a little bit of St. Augustine, just enough to show you. It doesn't look good, so don't, I didn't try to make it look good. So let me just show you the situation and talk to you a little bit about St. Augustine. So I have a big tree here and Bermuda grass, and I just threw out a few pieces of St. Augustine. I've got a better looking spot, but it's by more road noise. So let me show you what it looks like. And this is just spreading. You can see what we're growing on, basically a bed of rocks. But you know, it's doing okay. And I'm hoping in another few years, maybe it'll be solid St. Augustine under here. But you can see St. Augustine significantly wider leaf blade than on the centipede lawn. And a lot of times from a weed control and fertilization perspective, I treat a centipede and a St. Augustine lawn virtually the same. Usually going to go with less than 2 pounds of nitrogen per calendar year on both of those. I use a 18-1-9 blend on those types of grass. I'll do it twice a year and putting out about a bag for every 9,000 to 10,000 square feet. On my Bermuda and zoysia yards, I'm using more nitrogen and using a higher nitrogen blend of fertilizer, oftentimes using a slow release fertilizer that's like 38% nitrogen that I'm putting out on my Bermuda and zoysia lawns. St. Augustine, much more shade tolerant than centipede, in my opinion, definitely more shade tolerant than Bermuda, probably slightly less shade tolerant than zoysia, but I would say it's going to give it at least a decent run for its money. Again, shade tolerant doesn't mean it likes shade, would love to be out in the sun, but will tolerate some shade. I like St. Augustine in the situations. I'm at about the northernmost point where you're going to see it near Birmingham, Alabama. We don't have a lot of St. Augustine in my area. Going to struggle with a cold winter, but as you get down to the coast, St. Augustine can look really great. One of the perks I like about St. Augustine is I've been spraying growth regulator on my lawn to kind of slow down the growth where I don't have to mow it as often. St. Augustine, you get by with a very low rate of that, and you can really thicken it up and make it look great. But those big, lush blades of grass, I think they look pretty cool, even though I don't have a lot of them in my area. I'm not sure if it's the grass type, and somebody can correct me on this in the comments. I'm not sure it's because they have St. Augustine or because they live in Florida, but it seems like people in Florida have a lot of St. Augustine, and they also have a lot of insects. Again, the insects might just be there because it's Florida and because of the climate, or maybe they just love St. Augustine, or maybe it's a little bit of both. But you can get these insect problems in St. Augustine lawn. So a lot of times in a St. Augustine lawn, there's built into the program may be some insect control. You know, we didn't talk about that with Bermuda lawns, like things like armyworms come through, or you got, I think on St. Augustine and maybe zoysia lawns, you get the chinch bugs, things like that. A lot of things. I mean, centipede, I'm thinking about, you got the spittle bugs that run around. So different grasses have different problems with insects, but I'm hoping this video at least gave you some information on St. Augustine, zoysia, centipede, Bermuda. St. Augustine, I like to mow it higher. I've been mowing this at, 3.5 inches, something like that. Again, I'm mowing a rock bed with a little bit of St. Augustine. But the rule of thumb is you don't mow off more than 1/3 of the blade of grass. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to get in weed control and fertilization like me, or if you want information on the Lawn Care Life conference that we've been doing, go to lawncarelife.com. There's video courses, there's pricing charts, there's my weed control and fertilization cheat sheet. There's all kinds of stuff at lawncarelife.com. Or you can just hang out here and watch some more videos. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.